Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is exporting a file out of CounterSketch, importing it into Matrix, and then making sure that it is ready for export into your printer software. So we have the file here that we've found in CounterSketch that the customer is obviously happy with. We're going to go to the Order tab up the top here, and once it has calculated the metal weight, which will be shown in this area here, we're going to go down to the bottom button here which says Export STL 3DM. So when we click on that, another window will come up, and once that window comes up, it'll present us with a few more options. So at the moment we can see here the design options here as the default for our claws. The default means that the claws essentially look as though they've been set, and that's for presentation purposes. Obviously when you're showing a customer, it always looks a little bit better if the claws are actually set over the stone rather than protruding upwards. So what we're going to do for manufacturing purposes, we're going to click on Extend Prongs. What that's going to do is it's going to prepare the design and extend all of the prongs that it can, so that everything's all ready for manufacturing purposes. Now you'll notice that here it didn't really do anything. This is where it's important when you import the model into Matrix, and we'll go through that in just a moment. So the other thing we're going to want to do is show the center, side, and any accent stones that might happen to be in the piece. I have a tendency to check all of those boxes regardless of whether they're all there or not. The reason I like to do that is that you'll notice that in this particular piece, there are no azures for any of the stones. So if that is something that you wanted in your piece, you would obviously need to take that into Matrix as well and create cutters and Boolean difference those from the actual piece. I'm going to select the 3DM option here for output options. Main reason for that is that when I import that into Matrix, because I know I've got to do a little bit more work to this piece, it is a lot easier to do that kind of work to a 3DM file. An STL file is going to be a mesh, and if you were happy with the way this piece looked and you didn't need any further modification to it, you could simply hit STL and then hit the repair mesh option there, which will unify the entire mesh, making sure that it's all one nice watertight surface, so ready for 3D printing. But in this case, we're just going to select the 3DM option. Then you'd select where you want to export this piece to. Now I've selected my desktop. You can click on the browse and select anywhere you want. Just remember where you're actually exporting it to. I'm going to click on Export now. That will export this particular file, and then once that's finished, we'll open up Matrix. So we can click on that now. Let's go into our Matrix software and go to File, Import. We know the piece is on our desktop here, so we're going to grab our piece, just double click it. That's going to bring the piece into Matrix here for us, and we have the piece here ready to go. Now, as I mentioned before, this is a 3DM file, which is exactly what we're after. We need to extend our surfaces, or these particular surfaces here, so that we've got a little bit of meat to play with. For this particular model, because we've got two poly surfaces blending into one, what I'm actually going to do with this one is go to my red layer color, go to the curve menu, and I'm going to duplicate an edge here. Just that edge there will be fine. Enter. And then I'm going to just go into the through finger viewport, use my solid tool, and extend that up just a little bit. Something like that is probably well and truly enough. And then once we've got that looking like that, we can just mirror around F4, select that piece there as well. That not the red curve, sorry. Let's try that again. Let's select the actual surface that we want. Okay, so mirror around F4, shift. We're going to select that poly surface there, and then hit mirror again around F4, just for the top sections there. Alright, so what we've got there is something that looks like that. Now, as mentioned, none of these are cut into, none of the stones are cut into that. So if you wanted to create bearers or seats for these particular stones, we'd hit F6, go down to our gem cutter and select the gem cutter that you wanted. then you would adjust your handles as required and Boolean difference that away from the piece. So you'll get the idea of how that works. The next thing I'm going to do is, once I've finished doing all of my Boolean differencing, I'm going to delete my stones. I don't need those on anymore. And we're going to select the entire piece, go into the Tools menu, and select our Mesh Repair option. This is going to unify everything here, so it's kind of like a Boolean operation, but it turns it all into a mesh. Delete input objects equals on, so we don't want a duplicate there, and then simply hit enter. What will happen is it will begin converting the 3DM file to a mesh file or an STL, and as mentioned, it will repair everything that needs to be repaired. So any intersecting parts will be unified into the one piece. So at the moment, it's pretty quick. It's not too, certainly not too slow. We're at 60% at the moment. This particular process, depending on the geometry, can take anywhere from, say, 30 seconds right through to, a few minutes, just as I said, depending on the geometry of the piece. I'm just going to pause the video and just, once this is finished, a window will pop up and we'll go from there. Okay, so now that that's all completed, we have our window here. We can hit check mesh, and that's just going to make sure everything's all good. This is a good mesh. That's all you really need. Once you get that, we can shut that down. So now let's pop that in plastic mode, and maybe I'll put that onto a different layer color for the moment. And we have something that looks like this. Now, it's up to yourself as to whether you take this next step or whether you prefer to do this in your native 3D printers software. Most 3D printers have support generation tools. Matrix also has a support generation tool, and so what we can do is we can go into our tools menu again and simply select our 3D printing option. Let's roll a few of these menus up. And what we're going to do is we're first of all going to show the support regions of this particular piece, add the object. And what that's going to do is it will show us in red all of the areas that the software is actually recommending that we support. Now, depending on your 3D printer and also depending on the resin you're using will determine, I guess, how many of these supports you add. Lately, I've seen some resins that require virtually no internal supports, which is pretty awesome. So what we're going to do here is we're going to grab the ring, pop the ring support sprue option. In the command line here, we have all of our options that we can adjust this particular sprue. If we don't want that height anywhere near as high, we can take that down to, say, maybe 4, and just continue adjusting options as we need to. I'm quite happy with that, so I'm going to hit enter for that. As I mentioned before, some resins don't require this, but I'm just going to give you an example of how this works. X, Y, on, and we can just basically click where those red support layers are. So I'll turn off my wipes, oops, and maybe take that to something like that. Once we hit enter, we can simply come to this layer here and reduce that down in size to, I don't know, say about 0.8 or so. Do the same thing for the base. And then hit enter, and we end up with those kinds of supports. Alright, so once we're happy with that, I always recommend that we run the mesh repair again. This time it'll be a lot quicker, because the supports are obviously polysurfaces. They need to be converted to an STL as well. So hit enter, that will repair that particular mesh for us, making sure that the entire thing, including the supports, are all ready to be exported as an STL file. Once that's done, then we simply go up into the File option and Export and go to STL, and I'll show you that in just a minute. So we'll get the window come up here. Again, we'll hit Check Mesh. It'll tell us it's a good mesh yet again. And then we're going to go to File, Export Selected, and we'll close that down just for a minute. I like to put this on my desktop here, and you want to select the STL option. The default that comes out is a Rhino 5 file, but we want to go to STL, give it a name, and hit save. When that happens, you're going to get a window come up here. All you've got to do is hit OK to that. and you will find that this particular file is now on your desktop or wherever you've saved it, ready to be input into your 3D printing software and therefore print it up. Hope that helps.